Let me introduce you to someone. We'll call her Sarah. She's 28, she lives in Sydney, she works full time as a nurse, she earns $92,000 a year, which is roughly the median full time salary in Australia. Sarah wants to do something her parents did at her age, something her grandparents did even younger, something that used to be so ordinary it barely counted as an achievement. She wants to buy a home. Here's what that looks like for Sarah in 2026. The median house in Sydney costs $1.6 million. To avoid mortgage insurance, she needs a 20% deposit. That's $320,000. At her current savings rate, it will take her 15.7 years to save that deposit. She'll be 44 before she can even apply for a loan. But let's say Sarah gets lucky. Let's say she uses the government's new 5% deposit scheme. Now she only needs $80,000. She can save that in about 3 years. Great. She buys a house. Now her mortgage repayments consume 68% of her household income. The stress threshold, the point where financial experts say you're in danger, is 30%. Sarah isn't in danger. Sarah is more than double the danger line, and Sarah is the average. That 68% number comes from Domain's 2026 First Home Buyer Report, the most comprehensive study of first home buyer affordability published in Australia. Here's what it found. In Sydney, mortgage repayments on an entry-level home now consume 68% of household income. Not 68% of one person's income, 68% of a couple's combined income. Brisbane is at 50%, Adelaide at 44%, Perth at 42%. Melbourne, supposedly the affordable alternative, still sits at 41%. Across all capital cities combined, the average is 49%. Every single capital city in Australia is now above the 30% mortgage stress threshold. Everyone. There is no affordable capital city left in this country. And here's the detail that should terrify you. 5 years ago, the combined capital city average was 25%. It's now 49%. That's a 24 percentage point increase in 5 years, nearly double. In the same 5 years, entry-level house prices across Australia surged by 68%. Wages rose by 21%. Inflation rose by 23%. Let me make sure that's clear. Houses got 68% more expensive. Your paycheck got 21% bigger. The gap between those two numbers is the gap between owning a home and renting forever, and it's growing every single quarter, without exception. Before you even think about mortgage repayments, you have to get through the deposit. In Sydney, saving a 20% deposit on an entry-level house now takes 7 years and 7 months. That's up 10 months from just last year. In Brisbane, it's 6.3 years. Adelaide, 5.7. Even in Darwin, the cheapest capital, it takes 3.6 years. And those timelines assume you're saving aggressively. No emergencies, no car repairs, no medical bills, no life. The average deposit for a first-time buyer in Australia is now $173,000. That figure has increased by more than 50% since 2020. Here's a story that went viral in Australia last year. A 21-year-old demolition worker in Sydney was stopped on the street and asked about his savings. He had $15,000. He wanted to buy a home before 30. When asked if he thought that was possible, he said, "With everything going up, it just doesn't look like it's attainable." He's right, it's not. Not for him. Not for anyone earning what he earns. The average age of a first home buyer in Australia is now 36. It was 27 in the 1980s. And research from AHARI shows that home ownership rates for people aged 30 to 34 have fallen from 65% for those born in the 1950s to just 45% for those born in the late 1980s. A 20 percentage point collapse in a single generation. And the government's solution? Let people buy with a 5% deposit instead, which sounds helpful until you realise what it actually means. More people taking on enormous mortgages with almost no equity, in a market where they're already spending 68% of their income on repayments. As one financial analyst put it, this doesn't make the death small, it just makes the deposit hurdle smaller. The trap hasn't been removed, it's just been moved. Let's go back to Sarah. Let's walk through her actual life timeline under current conditions. Sarah finishes her nursing degree at 22. She starts full-time work. She earns $92,000. After tax, she takes home roughly $71,000. She starts saving. She lives in a share house in Western Sydney. Her rent is $450 a week, $23,400 a year. That's 33% of her take-home pay. She's already in rental stress before she saves a single dollar. After rent, utilities, food, transport, phone, and basic living costs, Sarah can save, if she's disciplined, about $15,000 a year. At that rate, saving a 20% deposit of $320,000 takes 21 years. She'll be 43. Okay, let's use the 5% scheme. $80,000. That takes 5 years and 4 months. She'll be 27. That's more realistic. So Sarah buys. She gets $1 million entry-level apartment because houses are $1.15 million at the cheapest. Her mortgage is $950,000. At 5.5% interest over 30 years, her monthly repayment is $5,392. That's $64,700 a year. Out of a take-home pay of $71,000, she has $6,300 left for the entire year, for everything: food, transport, electricity, internet, medical, clothing, insurance. $6,300. That's $525 a month for everything that isn't her mortgage. This is not a cautionary tale about bad financial planning. This is the mathematical reality of buying property in Sydney on the median Australian salary in 2026. The numbers simply don't work. They haven't worked for years, and every year they get worse. Sarah's parents bought their first home in 1991 for $168,000. It was 4 times their combined income. Their mortgage consumed 22% of their salary. They went on holidays. They saved for retirement. They lived. Sarah can't do any of those things, not because she earns less, not because she works less, but because the same country gave her parents affordable housing and gave her a speculative asset market dressed up as a real estate industry. There's a phrase that politicians love: entry-level housing. It implies a bottom rung, a starting point, a place where young people begin their property journey. That bottom rung in Sydney costs $1.15 million. That's not entry level, that's the price of a fully detached home in most other developed countries. Sydney's starter homes cost more than family homes in Berlin, Tokyo, Madrid, Toronto, and Chicago. And even that number is getting worse. Domain's 2026 report found that entry-level house prices rose 15% in Sydney in a single year. Across the country, entry-level prices jumped 20% or more in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and Darwin. In the last 5 years, entry-level house prices nationally have surged 68%. In Adelaide, which was supposed to be the affordable alternative, entry-level homes have risen by 159% in 5 years. And here's what really breaks the ladder. Units, apartments, were always the stepping stone, the way young Australians got their foot in the door. Cheaper than houses, smaller deposits, manageable repayments. That stepping stone is disappearing. For the first time on record, Brisbane has overtaken Sydney as having the longest time to save for an entry-level unit deposit. Adelaide and Perth aren't far behind. The affordability advantage of units over houses has been cut in half in most cities. As Domain's Chief of Research said, units have traditionally been the stepping stone into home ownership, but even that pathway is narrowing. When the stepping stone becomes unaffordable, there's just a wall. In October 2025, the Australian government announced what they called the biggest change to first home buyer support in a generation. The old home guarantee scheme was rebranded as the Australian Government 5% Deposit Scheme. Under the new rules, all first home buyers can now purchase with just a 5% deposit. No income caps, no annual place limits. Property price caps raised to 1.5 million in Sydney. The government guarantees up to 15% of your loan, so you skip lenders' mortgage insurance entirely. On paper, this sounds like salvation. In the 4 months after it launched, 22,921 guarantees were issued, a 75% increase from the prior period. But here's what the press releases don't tell you. This scheme doesn't create a single new home. It creates new buyers, more demand, into a market already drowning in demand. Multiple economists have estimated the scheme could push prices up by 3.5 to 6.6% in its first year alone. Domain's own forecast projects an additional 20,000 buyers entering the market in 2026 because of the scheme. That's 20,000 more people competing for the same insufficient housing stock. And the buyers who do get in? They're entering with 5% equity, in a market where prices can fall by that much in a single quarter. If Sydney's median house price drops by 5%, which it's done before, every buyer who entered with a 5% deposit is instantly underwater, owing more than their home is worth. Trapped. The scheme also disguises the true cost. A 5% deposit on $1 million property is $50,000. But the mortgage is $950,000. At current rates, the total interest paid over 30 years is more than $700,000. The total cost of that $1 million apartment is $1.65 million for an entry-level flat. And the monthly repayments, they still consume 68% of income. The deposit scheme changes how you get in. It doesn't change what happens once you're there. This is not a solution. It's a trapdoor with a welcome mat. Let's do the math that Australian politicians refuse to do. In 1975, the average house in Sydney cost $34,000. The average salary was about $8,500. The house cost 4 times the annual wage. Mortgage repayments consumed 44% of the median monthly salary. By 1990, the median price of housing had grown to roughly 3 times the median income across Australia. A working family with 2 incomes could comfortably buy a home, pay it off in 20 to 25 years, and still have a life. Then came 2000, the capital gains tax discount, negative gearing expansion, and the market took off like a rocket. By 2024, Sydney house prices had risen by 4,645% from 1975. The median house now costs 9.5 times the median dual income. Mortgage repayments require 143% of the median monthly salary. Let me translate that. If an average Australian gave every cent they earned to the bank, no food, no electricity, no petrol, no clothes, they still could not make the monthly mortgage payment on a median Sydney house. In the 1980s, the average first home buyer was 27. Today, it's 36. In the 1950s, home ownership for 30 to 34-year-olds was 65%. Today, it's 45%. And the generational wealth gap is accelerating. The average value of housing held by people under 35 has fallen from 31% of the national average to 26%. For those aged 35 to 44, from 82% to 69%. For those over 64, it rose from 140 to 144%. The older generation is getting wealthier through property they bought when it was cheap. The younger generation is getting poorer because they can't buy property at all. And the gap is locked in by a tax system that rewards the people who already own homes and punishes the people who don't. Intergenerational wealth, the bank of mum and dad, has replaced hard work, savings, and financial discipline as the primary pathway to home ownership. If your parents own property, you have a chance. If they don't, the research from AHUR is blunt. The single biggest factor in whether a young Australian can buy a home is whether their parents own one. Merit is dead. Inheritance is the new deposit. When 68% of your income goes to housing, the rest of your life collapses around it. Discretionary spending disappears. Restaurants, holidays, gym memberships, streaming services, gone. But it goes deeper than that. People delay having children because they can't afford a second bedroom. They delay medical treatment because the copay is one bill too many. They stay in jobs they hate because they can't afford the gap between paychecks. 21% of young Australians have already delayed major life milestones, studying, moving out, starting families, specifically because of housing costs. And the economy feels it. When households spend 68% of their income on a mortgage, that money doesn't flow through the economy. It flows to the bank. It doesn't create jobs. It doesn't support local businesses. It doesn't generate economic growth. It services debt. Mortgage stress leads to reduced discretionary spending, which has a cascading effect on employment and economic growth. Economists at First Financial describe it as a self-reinforcing cycle where the economy weakens as households tighten their belts, which in turn reduces income growth, which makes the mortgages even harder to service. And the psychological cost is enormous. 3 in 10 Australians under 40 have some level of concern about becoming homeless within the next 12 months. Not just worried about money, worried about losing their home in one of the richest countries on earth. 64% of women under 40 say they're very concerned about the cost of living. Not concerned, very concerned. That's the highest anxiety level of any demographic group in the country. This isn't a housing problem, it's a societal paralysis. An entire generation frozen in place, unable to buy, barely able to rent, afraid to start families, afraid to change jobs, afraid to live. Because 68% of everything they earn disappears into a mortgage that their parents could have paid off in 15 years. There's a rational response to an irrational market. You leave. And that's exactly what's happening. Sydney has experienced its largest rates of domestic outmigration in over 20 years, larger even than the pandemic. Without net overseas migration, Sydney's population would be shrinking. People in their 30s, the age group that should be buying homes, starting families, building careers, are the most common demographic leaving. They're heading to coastal New South Wales, southeast Queensland, regional Victoria. Not because they want to, because Sydney told them in every possible financial signal that they are not welcome. And it's not just interstate. 53% of young Australians, more than half, say they've considered leaving the country entirely to find affordable housing. 16% say they definitely would. Social scientists are documenting Australians actively researching housing and employment options in Southeast Asia, Europe, and New Zealand. Not as tourists, as refugees from their own housing market. People are calling them the exit generation, and the name is sticking because the numbers back it up. Mortgage brokers across Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and the Gold Coast are reporting the same thing. People are getting priced out of areas that 3 years ago wouldn't have been an issue. They're moving further and further from the cities where their jobs are, their families live, their children go to school. One broker described it simply: what we thought was the norm is no longer the norm. Everything is priced much higher. People are just getting pushed out of their suburbs, pushed out of their cities, pushed out of their country. Because 68%, the uncomfortable truth is that making housing affordable means making it cheaper. And making it cheaper means the people who already own homes lose money. And in a country where 66% of households own property, that's a political death sentence. But the math is simple. For housing to return to the affordability levels of 1990, where the median price was 3 times the median income, one of two things has to happen. Either house prices need to fall by roughly half, or incomes need to grow at 4% per year for 20 years while prices stay flat. Neither is likely without intervention. The interventions that work are well documented. Reduce the capital gains tax discount. It costs over $21 billion a year and overwhelmingly benefits the wealthiest Australians. Scaling it back would make property speculation less attractive overnight. Reform negative gearing. When investors can deduct rental losses from their income tax, the system subsidises speculation. The ACOSIS recommended halving the CGT discount over 5 years and ending negative gearing on new purchases. Replace stamp duty with a broad-based land tax. The OECD recommended exactly this in 2026. Stamp duty punishes movement and rewards sitting on property. A land tax encourages efficient use of land. Build public housing at massive scale. Australia used to do this. Between 1945 and 1970, government construction accounted for 16% of all residential building. Home ownership went from 53% to 71%. The model worked. It was deliberately dismantled. And match immigration to construction capacity. You cannot add 300,000 people a year to a country that can't build enough homes for the people already here. Every expert has said the same things. For years, for decades, nothing happens because the people who benefit from the crisis outnumber the people who suffer from it, and they vote. Let's go back to Sarah one last time. Sarah is 28. She's a nurse. She looks after your parents when they're in hospital. She saves lives. She earns the median salary. She does everything right. And the country she serves has priced her out of the most basic form of security a society can offer, a home. If Sarah buys in Sydney, 68% of her income goes to the bank. She has $525 a month for everything else. She can't get sick. She can't take a holiday. She can't have a baby without risking financial ruin. If she doesn't buy, she rents. And rents are rising faster than her wages every year, without exception. If she moves, she leaves the hospital that needs her, the city she grew up in, the family that raised her. She becomes part of the exit generation, one more skilled worker that Sydney couldn't afford to keep because Sydney couldn't afford to house. This is what 68% looks like, not as a statistic, as a life. And there are hundreds of thousands of Sarahs, teachers, paramedics, social workers, electricians, chefs, the people who make a city function, who cannot afford to live in the city they keep alive. In 1975, it took 4 years of the average salary to buy a home. In 2026, it takes 68% of your salary just to pay the mortgage. That's not a housing market. That's an extraction machine. And unless something changes, fundamentally, structurally, politically changes, it will only get worse. That's not a prediction. That's the trend line. And every year for 25 years, the trend line has been right. If this video made you feel something, subscribe. I'm building a series exposing the countries that look rich from the outside while crushing their own people from the inside. Next video, I'm going to show you what happens when 250,000 families are on a waiting list for a home that will never come, and the numbers are devastating. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me what 68% would look like in your life. I'll see you in the next one.